Now's a good time to remember where the story of tequila started. In 1795, the first tequila distillery was opened by the Cuervo family. And 229 years later, Cuervo is still going strong. Family owned from the start, same family, same land. Now's a good time to enjoy Cuervo, the tequila that invented tequila. Go to Cuervo.com to shop tequila or visit a store near you. Cuervo, now's a good time. Trademarks owned by Becle, SAB the CV. Copyright 2024. Proximo. Jersey City, New Jersey. Please drink responsibly.
Huh.
Watching Kyle's unboxing videos again?
Yeah, he always finds the coolest... No way! A robot dog? Gotta ask where he got it.
Or use your Samsung Galaxy S24 Ultra. Just draw a circle around the dog on your screen, and it shows you where to buy it right in the app.
Oh, I just learned a new trick. And that for once, I beat Kyle to the next big thing.
Circle it, find it with the new Galaxy S24 Ultra and circle the search with Google. Get yours now at Samsung.com. Internet connection required. Results may vary based on visuals.
You and Tony showed me the way, showed me what could be possible.
I'm 10 years older than you, and that means Tony's 20. And you know, Dan, that first of all, that means a lot to come from you. It means a lot to come from the people that are in a group that are half. If generation is 20 and half generation is 10, it means you and Stephen A. Smith and certain people that are exactly 10 years younger. We don't think of you guys as being younger, but you are. And if we showed anything, if we did anything that reveals some sort of humanity, my mother was a teacher, taught public school in Chicago for 35 years, so teaching's important. So that's a hell of a compliment. Thank you for saying that.
I'm so grateful to you and Tony and Ride Home and Kelleher and the entire environment that you had around you, because it showed me what kind of environment I wanted around me. I tell people all the time, it wasn't even the friendship of Tony and Mike that made me gravitate toward how I would do it in its evolution. It's what they had behind the scenes, caring for them, the people taking care of their relationship and enjoying each other's company, creating something. Like, you guys really did birth. I'm not kidding you when I tell you that you guys watching you, because it was unstated. It's not like you were telling me, holding me by the hand, saying, here, Dan.
Because guys don't talk about that stuff, right? No, Dan, but it comes, but there's another place where you got some of it, because you're the people 10 years younger than us are the last people to sadly get this. And it was the camaraderie, the engagement, the contention of the newsroom. And so ours is based on, if people are old enough to have watched Mary Tyler Moore and the ensemble cast of Mary Tyler Moore and Ted Baxter and John Amos and, of course, Lou Grant. Ed
they were
Asner.
living, breathing things. Newsrooms they had a heart.
They were. I missed that. People say you miss writing. Not really. I miss the newsroom. But I know the newsrooms don't exist anymore. Not like they did for us. And so Tony and I existed in the same newsroom, and we took that down the street. And Eric, speaking of people, Eric's not quite 10 years younger, but you guys got the benefit of some of that. And yes, Tony and I, we needed it. It was mandatory to flourish in that kind of environment. So
needed the sparks, needed people arguing, cursing at each other, creative bursts.
Something that HR would not tolerate anymore. We used to tell young people who came into the PTI newsroom in so this is 2001, 2002, 3, 4, 5, 6, young people, interns, men and women, young men and women.
Be careful at how Tony and Mike are yelling at each other.
We're going to curse. We don't give a shit if you don't like it. If you don't like it, leave. Oh, my God, can you imagine if people in Bristol knew that? That's what we did, and we didn't care. And you know what? No one ever complained to our knowledge because it was a democratic place. It was a place where you could scream back. That's the magic of it, that everybody was sort of equal no matter who got paid more. Everybody was pretty equal.
Did you realize that you were pioneering? Did you realize that you were leading the way, giving sports writers permission to turn into characters on television?
I would tell you why the answer is no. It's an actual concrete no. Because I grew up Dan, I'm the weirdest creature in this way. People come to me and they say, Stephen A. Smith has told me this. We work together every week on Countdown on ESPN. And he's told me, people have said you were the first person I sort of saw. And then when I was in the profession already, you guys made this transition. Well, when I was a kid, I'm talking about 12, 14 years old. Brent Musburger did this in Chicago. He wrote for the Chicago Daily News, and then Brent Musburger was on CBS with Jimmy the Greek and Irv Cross and Jane Kennedy and Miss America. I'm forgetting that. Phyllis George. So Brent Musburger covered the Bears, and then he was on TV. So I was a kid. And then there was a guy, which bringing it even closer to home for me, a guy named Wendell Smith. Wendell Smith was a black man, an African-American man in his, I'm guessing, 50s and 60s. His widow just died. And he was writing a column for the Chicago Sun-Times, and he was on WGN at the same time when I was 8 and 10 years old. So I've had people come up to me in the last 20 years saying, you were the first person I saw who looked like me who did this. I saw someone, Wendell Smith, who looked like me and did both and crossed over and transitioned into television when I was 10. So 55 years ago. So no, I don't consider myself a pioneer. I saw people do this. I actually know one of them. Brent Musburger is something of a mentor without ever being presumptuous enough. Brent Musburger I went to the same college. Went to Northwestern. Brent is Papa Wildcat. Brent is 80 plus at this point, right? So Brent's got at least 16, 17 years on me.
Okay, you can cite other pioneers, but for me and for Stephen A. Smith, you were the guy.
And I have I know that's factually, I get it. I believe you guys. It's just, but you asked me if I thought of myself that way. God, no.
Well, you were too busy working and repressing general feelings that aren't supposed to be spoken out loud by sportsmen.
Repressing.
Sports cavemen. But you, man, I remember your kindness, your grace, Michael, beyond just being nice to people walking through an arena of people slapping you on the back and really seeming like someone who was grateful that anybody would think Michael Wilbon's words meant anything, enough to make him a rock star. But beyond that, you and Tony were so generous with your platform. And you know as well as I do that that's not true of all of your sports writing peers with ego.
No, it's not true of all of our colleagues, which is too bad because we generally felt that way. We generally felt that way. I just think it's how I was raised. There's no presumption. I was raised by two people who fled the South post Depression, who were part of the Great Migration from Georgia and Tennessee and general places in the South, but specifically for them, Georgia and Tennessee, my father and mother respectively, to Chicago. And they were grateful for what they had, all of it. Grateful every day. And you had to be grateful, and there was no presumption. There was no other way. And then I really believe that people from the Midwest use the phrase Midwestern sensibilities. That exists, and I know people from the East don't believe it, and people from the West aren't even aware of what it is.
Oh, but it's not just politeness. Hold on a second. There are plenty of people in this business, competitive people in this business, who would have been threatened. You have real confidence, but who would be threatened by the sharing of the stage? That it is mine. It is not. You had a seminal program that somehow still exists, okay, that has made its way through the labyrinth of all ESPN things. Isn't subject to cuts because you guys are now above cuts. Like you've got seniority.
Let's hope.
You are tenured.
I got a kid in high school. I need to be above cuts.
You are tenured at what it is that you do. And from the very beginning, you shared that with me. And you didn't have to. And you did it in a really loving way that made someone who was nervous feel accepting.
Thank you for saying that. And Dan, it wasn't conscious. That's who we were. Those were the conditions under which we came into the business and grew up, and we were very lucky too to have the people that shared what they shared at the New York Times and Newsday for Tony and the Washington Post, and the Washington Post for me. There's no I mean, Bob Woodward and Ben Bradley were that way when we got to the Post. So why wouldn't we be? Didn't think of it.
The Watergate reporters were that way with Tony and Mike in sports.
Yes. I remember, I don't know why this came up recently, but it did. Tony and I were talking about it on November 22nd, 1988, which would have been the 25th anniversary exactly of the assassination of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Tony and I were on the 5th floor where the Washington Post newsroom famously was, and we were just thinking about the 25th anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Well, his best friend was our boss, Benjamin C. Bradley, the great editor of the Post. And we decided to go up to his office and ask him if he would take us to lunch. If we, I don't even know what got into us. Tony did most of the talking. I was too scared. And we went into Ben's office. His secretary said, he's back there, go in. And Ben Bradley, people can picture Jason Robards if they need to, said, you two look like you want something. We said, we'd like you. Can we go to lunch? Why? Well, he goes, of course he knows what today is. And Ben Bradley took us to lunch for like 3 hours and told us stories.
Gruff old newspaper men, but you guys did bring journalism to what it. You guys brought in changing the way sports television was done. You guys brought a journalistic sensibility that had a little bit of meet the press to it,
yes, it did.
And had also the crossfire sensibilities of we're going to argue, but we love each other, and the arguments aren't going to mean anything, and
they're not going to be phony.
They're not going to be
unlike Crossfire, which was completely phony.
Or a lot of sports television these days.
Yeah, it is. It is, but we brought that sensibility because, again, that's who we were. I mean, part of this, anything that you're crediting us with, and I'll speak for Tony now too, it's who we were. It's how we were trained. I went to what I think is the greatest journalism school in the world, Northwestern's Medill, and I brought that training. Plus, I worked at one place for 30 years and 6 months, the Washington Post. That's all I knew. I knew how to go about news that way and sports that way. And treat it like it was news, not like it was the toy section. It wasn't the toy section. And I know where you grew up at the Miami Herald, and I know people like Edwin Pope who helped shape my early life. They did. I know we were shaped by some of the same forces. And I know the people that you worked with, like Greg Cody, because I feel that there was a way that we were all taught to be at that point in the business. And I'm grateful for that. And so I take no credit, though I'm glad you offer it, for sharing the stage. The stage was to be shared. It wasn't mine. It wasn't mine to dominate. And I know what you're talking about. I won't name names, and we know the same people who did not want to share. I don't care about them.
Well, there are more than I found more of those in this business than I found people like you and you and
did
Tony.
More things, and you went more places, and you had more interactions with people on that level than we did. You know, you know me. I want to go to a gym on a Tuesday night.
All right, we are in one of the best times of the year in the sports calendar, and March Madness is taking over everything. When you get to that bar with your friends and you look across the table and you see a 15 seed beating a 2 seed, you see an 8-9 matchup that's really tough, all of a sudden the waiter comes by and you say, hey, let me get a tall pitcher of some ice cold Miller Lite. Miller Lite keeps it simple with undebatable quality, great taste, and only 96 calories. It's the beer that strips away everything you don't need and holds on to what matters most, the original light beer since 1975. Times change, but you can always enjoy the great taste of Miller Lite. Taste like Miller time. Boy, does it. To get Miller Lite delivered right to your door, visit MillerLite.com/beach. That's BEACH. Or you can find it pretty much anywhere that sells beer. Celebrate responsibly. Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 96 calories per 12 ounces.
What? Welcome, by the way. I just don't want you to be humble guy here. Like, what you do is hard, and you can talk about it gratefully before God without poo-pooing how hard it is to do what you do, because I know they make it look easy. It is not as easy as you make it look.
there's a lot of work, and I love the work, and I love the prep. And look, I appreciate everything you said about the show and about my role. And there's not a day that goes by that I am not as thankful as I could possibly be about sitting in that chair for that long. Since I was hired in 1989 by Turner Broadcasting and had to sit out a 6-month no-compete clause because I had been working in local TV in Atlanta. So I just spun my wheels for 6 months, did a few stories, and then it was the next season, 90-91 season, they said, hey, Craig Sager is going to go on the road. He's going to be a sideline reporter because Craig was in the chair. And so you're our NBA guy. And it was, I had no idea that I'd be sitting here in 2023 talking about this run in that role. That was never in the cards. And what's kept me there is being prepared. And that's the whole key to the longevity.
Often without needing your colleagues to be as prepared because they're there for expertise. And I know how much Charles hates those March Madness weekends where they make him memorize all the names because you're doing the preparation in a lot of ways, as is an unbelievable production team, so that Kenny and Charles and Shaq can be maximum themselves. The reason that I admire it, one of the many reasons I admire it so much, is because of how rare it is to be able to keep those spinning plates together and working together. Sure. When this is the vanity business, Ernie. Like Shaq's used to being a star. Charles is used to being the star of that show. Kenny is used to being a facilitator who understands your role better than most.
Mm-hmm. But and the thing, you know why it's work? Because nobody tries to make themselves the show. Because they've never tried to make the show about themselves. And I'm in the fortunate position of getting us from point A to point B to point C with 3 guys who have been in every conceivable situation in a basketball game. And so nobody at home cares if what I think about what might be being said in a huddle with 1.7 seconds to go. They want to hear from the guys who have been there. And so it's up to me to try to bring out the best in these 3 guys. And knowing your role is vital. You know, if you try to stray outside your lane and be something you aren't, then it doesn't work. And the fact that we don't rehearse and the fact that we just let her rip, there you go.
They have such reverence for your decency, though. Those, I've heard Charles speak about you. He doesn't speak about many the way that he speaks about you. Those guys would do almost anything for you and have.
And I would do the same for them. We all would.
Well, that's pretty unusual in television, isn't it?
Yeah, you know TV, yes, but I think that's what comes with years of being together. And when you think about Kenny and I have been together the longest because I used to do the show by myself, and then for a while, just here's Cheryl Miller for a while, here's Reggie Theus for a while, here's Dick Versace for a while, and then Kenny comes along and we have a pretty good thing going, and then Chuck. But the 3 of us for more than 20 years have been doing this together, which is unheard of in TV, where the next TV executive always has a better idea. Oh, no, these 3 guys will work. No, this 2, and to take him out and add him. And then Shaq for the last dozen years. So when you have that kind of time together and you have that kind of a bond, then you just... I'm not sounding sappy here. We love each other. We really, truly. And, I grew up with 2 older sisters, and this is as close as I'll ever come to having brothers. And that's what they are to me.
Do you tell them?
Oh, all the time.
Do they tell you?
Yeah. And you know what? There was a moment, too, when Kobe passed. We did a show out in L.A. Right there in the middle of the floor. The game had been canceled, but we were just going to spend that time talking about Kobe. And I remember Shaq on that night saying, on the air that I don't say this enough to you guys, but I love you, and we do. And I think one thing that whole moment in time taught all of us was that you don't know. You don't know how long you have. And it behooves us to make sure that everything's cool between us. Everything's cool, not just between the four of us on the show, but between everybody in your life. That if the unthinkable happens, do you want to leave that with, man, I wish I had said this. Man, I wish that silly feud, I could have stepped up and defused it. I wish I would have said this. And I think it was a pretty brutal reminder of that.
How important is love to any sensitive thing that happens because people are talking for 6 hours on television a night and sparks are going to be caused and disagreements happen between siblings, friends, and loved ones? There's not a bigger ingredient to why it is that it's successful than that, right?
Mm-hmm. Without question, yeah. And that cuts right through the essence of what we do. And I mean, let's not get carried away with points in the paint and second chance points and fast break points and who's making this decision and why is this important. Keep it where it is. Sports is a great distraction from the real stuff because there's enough real stuff going on that'll drive you crazy. And so I think it's really important that while this is my job, and being in that chair has been at the center of my professional life, let's not forget what really matters. And because we're so familiar with each other, and because there are times where tempers, I wouldn't even call it tempers, it's just where opinions differ and defenses are raised, we're talking sports, you know.
Oh, but I've found Shaq unusually sensitive. Not Charles.
He is.
But I've found Shaq to be, I don't know Kenny this way, but I feel like Charles isn't terribly sensitive. Almost anything rolls off of Charles.
You'd be surprised.
How so?
Because I think there are things that strike him, that strike a chord with him, that he feels very strongly about. You know, you don't hear much about it, but I mean, he has causes like HBCUs are really important to him. The donations he makes there, how the average person in the world is getting by matters to him and matters deeply to him. And he is hurt when he sees things happen. So yeah, there's a sensitive side to Chuck. There's a very sensitive side to Shaq. I mean, there have been times where we have felt that with him, and
the viewer too.
Yeah, and we may laugh on the air about it, but he may take it home with him.
That's what I say when I say he isn't sensitive. I meant sort of to criticism. I've seen Charles with whatever would be described as the little people. Charles is extraordinary about giving of himself, unlike anyone I've ever seen in fame, making every person who comes into contact with him make sure that they walk away from, okay, that was, as long as I don't disrespect him, he won't throw me through a plate glass window. But if I'm just human with him, he will be just as human back to me in a way that's moving to me every time I see it.
Yeah. This is true. And with Shaquille, look, we had a huge laugh and people have seen the clip. Hey, it's supposed to go 1 to 2 to 3, not 1 to 2 and back to 1, you know, and because Charles had taken up all this airtime on a sponsored element that we're weighing in on. And we all laughed, and we kept laughing with Shaq because it just sounded so funny. But he was bothered by it and came in the next day and carried it with him. It was like it hadn't been forgotten. It was like in the middle of these playoff runs where it's not like it happened on a Thursday, now we'll work again next Thursday. It was the next night. and he was still kind of in a shell. And so we realized, that he is sensitive to this. And I'll be honest, I had an episode with him last year when he was late for a show. And there had been traffic, and we're living in Atlanta, and there's always a lot of traffic. But he showed up late for the show. And he came up with an excuse on the air about it was this or this, and we went to commercial break, and he said, "How'd you like that excuse?" And it had been kind of one of those days for me, too, and I said, "I didn't like it." "What are you talking about?" I said, "I didn't like it." I said, "You need to be here." He said, "What am I supposed to do about 18-wheeler turning over and blah, blah, blah?" I said, "You need to be here." I said, "You're vital to this show." All right. Next day, dead silence. And really the rest of that night, that's where it happened. The rest of those shows that night, he was kind of just sitting in the chair, not volunteering much, waiting to be called on, which is not the way our show works. So I knew this was me. I had kind of crossed that line with him. And he respects me. And I respect him. I mean, I did a story with him back at his house in San Antonio before he was in the NBA. And he always brings that up. "Man, you came to my house." And he always says it's 1989, but it was like 91. Okay, so I knew that it bothered him, that I had gotten on him.
Do you look at anything that you have done in your past professionally with a regret, a call, a decision, anything? Do you look back on it and say, this didn't go the way that I would have planned it now with the wisdom I have accrued now?
No, I mean, there are plenty of calls that I butchered and mistakes I made on the air, but I think it's impossible for that not to happen.
Were you gentle with yourself about it?
No, not at first. I mean, the first however many years, it kills you, just kills you, and shakes your confidence to the point where you're thinking about it every night. And if that situation comes up again, I hope I can do better. I mean, it stays with you.
You can't be as good as you are at it without being a perfectionist that way, right? It has to hurt.
Right, and it should, because you want to get better, but as long as you learn from it. But now as you get older, it's you realize it's live television. You're going to make mistakes, and it's okay. You have to just own up to mistakes. I told this recently where last year, first game of the playoffs, Brooklyn played Boston. Jason Tatum makes this great play at the end, wins the game for the Celtics. It was like one of the classic finishes. And I so butchered the call, and I was really upset that night because I felt our team had one of the best telecasts we've had all year. Like, everything clicked. And that's one of the real fun parts of the job, when everybody from the producer, director, the camera people, the graphics people, we're all just kicking ass. And we did that day until I blew it at the end. So that's what tormented me, and that took a couple of days. But then you realize, okay, you can get back into it. It's okay.
Last year, Mike Breen, consummate professional, was tormented for days.
What? Maybe tormented's too strong. I didn't sleep that night. I was upset. I wanted to do a game the next day so badly, just so I could get just back in and
it's a bit of a craze, though. It's an insanity to.
No question.
I mean, you've been doing this too long to have sleepless nights of torment because you haven't made a career-ending decision in the broadcast. You haven't made a mistake that ends your career, but just you had a bad night.
Yes.
Or a bad ending to a bad night.
But I guarantee you ask any play-by-play announcer, and they'll tell you the same thing. Now, some might be better, but most that I know, I have some great friends that have done it, and we share the stories. Ian Eagle is a great friend of mine, Kevin Harlan, Brian Anderson. We talk about this all the time. And We're all the same way.
I have a friend who does this, who describes that as spending the night eating his own right arm.
Right.
Like
right.
just consuming his right arm because of the way that you're ravaging yourself because you've been something less than perfect in front of people.
Right. You let it go as you get older. You let it go. And I was better about it than I had been in the past on such an important game. But it's all part of the deal.
What other advice have you gotten from broadcasters that has stayed with you? You mentioned that you you said it was Stockton,
right.
not Emberg, right? That obviously one of the best to do it. What are some other advices that you've gotten along the way from people that have been most helpful?
Two were that I love listening to and gave me advice. Vern Lundquist and Dick Enberg. Lundquist had a phrase, celebrate the game. And it's so appropriate because, unfortunately, sometimes the game is bad. Sometimes you have to criticize players, coaches, refs. But people are watching the game because they love basketball. They don't want to hear you just killing people all the time. It's a game they love. That's why they're watching it. So celebrate the good parts. And Vern was great at that. And he also helped in terms of telling you, make the people feel like the guy who's sitting next to you or the woman who's sitting next to you, that you're best friends and are having just a time of your life together. And that I thought was really important. So that's something I did. The other with Dick Enberg was people want to know about the athletes that you're talking about. So give them some personal anecdotes and let them know that these players, these young men in the NBA, are human beings that have really interesting stories. So those two, more than just the technique of doing play-by-play, those two things I thought were important.
It must be strange to you, as fundamentally decent as you are, to see the coarsening in sports coverage when you're just trying to tell nice stories about an athlete who's human, but you come from a tabloid city. You've seen sports television become argument television. You've seen Anthony Davis be amazing and majestic, but a source of just endless criticism. It must be bothersome to you to watch what sports coverage has become.
I hate it. It's journalism has become criticism, and I hate that it's people feel that they have to be critical and to be considered a good journalist or to be a good analyst. And there's so much out there that's it's difficult to put yourself in their positions. I mean, we all make mistakes. I make mistakes on the air. Players make mistakes on the court, and it's become too critical and it's not just having to be critical, it's the words that are used in the criticism. I've always felt I'll criticize somebody, but I'll only use words that I would say to their face. For example, if you have a terrible game, you could say, oh, boy, Dan he just was awful. He stunk. It was an embarrassment what he did. Or you can say, boy, Dan really struggled tonight. You're saying the same thing. It's a more humane way to say it. Why do you have to crush people while you criticize them? There's a respectful way to do it. And I think a lot of people have gotten away from that, and that bothers me.
Has it gotten meaner? Because you've worked in New York for a long time. The tabloids have played with this for a while. Basically, sports radio and sports division was invented there. Sports radio has infected just about everything that is the sports coverage today.
Yeah, no, it's definitely gotten meaner. Often there's a mocking tone to it. It's unfortunately, that's what gets people noticed. And that's why when I find, when I talk to college students who want to do this, that's something I bring up. And I use that expression I just said to you before is like, only say something about somebody that you would say to their face if you had to. Because if you're doing words that you'd be hesitant to say right to them face to face, I don't think you're doing it the right way.
But you have watched and seen many of your peers. This doesn't happen to you a lot. Just get wrecked by criticism.
You mean the broadcasters getting wrecked?
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm talking about there is such a swell of all manner of emotion around sports right now, and such a cruelty in the way that we absorb content with the advent, I shouldn't even say the advent of social media, but there's a lot of criticism on social media that would not be said to anybody's face. And you manage a space in this ecosystem that somehow doesn't get a lot of what I'm talking about, which is that announcer stinks for all of these reasons.
Right. No, it's incredible. Well, Twitter is just, it's toxic in terms of it gives people the license just to destroy people. And I guess it's the old thing, people want to make themselves better by bringing down others, excuse me, to their level.
$5. Don't pay any attention to me. It's just a fine for coughing into a microphone. It's an inside joke around here.
Okay.
You're going to put the $5. You're going to actually get the cash out of your pocket here and give us $5. You've got Van Gundy and Mark Jackson. They're perpetually getting hammered. Those guys are perpetually getting beat up. They're more opinionated than you are. You're playing it down the middle, but their part of the telecast is always something that's polarizing because there's a lot of people listening and they're going to get mad about something.
Well, their criticism, though, from what I view it at, is they have such a love for the game. So when they see a player, a coach, or a ref, or the league not doing something that's for the best for the game, that's where they criticize it because they want the best of the game that they love the most. And that's, to me, what makes them so good is they're not hesitant to make their feelings felt. But I also feel their love of the game comes out all the time. And I mean, the criticism that they get, I have no idea. I think they're, for me, it's a dream come true working with these two. We've been friends, all three of us, for over 30 years. And to do it this long with them sitting by my side, that's one of the reasons why I've had success, because I'm with two guys that I love as brothers, teach me about the game, and I'm so comfortable with them on the air.
Do you tell them how you feel about them?
It's so funny you say that. Because they don't like that kind of stuff. They're not interested. They know how I feel. They don't need me to say it. But just the other day, before Game 1 of the finals, I sent them both a text telling them how much they mean to me. But I specifically said at the end of the text, I don't want to hear anything back. You don't respond to this because it would be a mock. They would be mocking me for doing that. But they know how I feel about them.
Why'd you feel the need to do that right before that?
Because I hadn't said it in a while, and that's kind of, again, it goes back to what we were talking about before. When you have kindness thrown your way, and it makes you feel good, you like to show, you know what, I can do the same thing. Maybe I can make somebody feel good with a nice text or a nice phone call. And I just felt, because I hadn't told them in a while, and we've been doing it a long time, and it kind of came because, there was a press release about my 18th finals, and I can't comprehend that. That's not something I can process, that I've been able to call the finals for 18 years. That's beyond anything I could even possibly dream about. And to do it with them, it just was it made me feel, boy, how blessed I am to have these two next to me, and that's why I sent it.
How do you feel about them? I mean, you've told me they're like brothers, but what does that mean?
They would do anything in the world for me, and they know I'd do anything in the world for them. And that's on a personal note. On a professional note, the beauty of it is we can say anything to each other on the air, and nobody gets offended. And that's rare in the business to have that. And I think... again, because we came in the league the same time, Jeff taught me so much about the league as a coach when he was an assistant. Mark taught me so much about it as a player and then as a coach. We watched our families grow up together. We spent a lot of time away from our families with each other. That it's just been a special part of my life to have all these wonderful things happen with them next to me, and I can't imagine it being any other way.
But you don't tell them that you love them.
Oh, no, Jeff would smack me if I told him. But they know I do.
I guess now I've known you for close to 30 years, right? Because your first job was in Fort Lauderdale, right? Your first professional job?
So I graduated from Northwestern, and I had done an internship in Fort Lauderdale a year earlier. So I think that's actually when I first met you, before I was even out of college. And then, yes, I was 21 years old. I moved down to the Fort Lauderdale, Miami area, and I was sort of the backup on the reporter on the Dolphins and the backup reporter on the UM team and the football team, which was, at that point, it was Ray Lewis's senior year. And I don't have to tell you, but the audience knows how bananas that was. And there just weren't people like me there. And you were, frankly, the closest thing. And we are not we don't look alike. But the fact that, I was really surrounded by 40-year-old plus men who didn't necessarily want a woman there, or a girl as they saw me. And I was 21, so I'm not pretending I was older than I was. And they didn't want someone who was 21 there. And they kind of thought, well, she didn't earn it. She wasn't here,
Oh, I didn't know you felt that kind of unwelcome from the start.
I didn't feel it. I was told. I mean, that's the thing. Like, this kind of stuff doesn't, at least, I think now it's more coded. Like, back then, it wasn't coded. It was, we don't want you here. Or you're only here because someone had to fill a quota. Or you're too young for this. Like, that kind of stuff. And, like, directly and out loud. So
I don't think of you that way as a pioneer, because the women who came right before you, the
before
Lisa
me.
Olsons, had to walk
Christine
in the locker
Brennan,
rooms. Yes.
Yes.
Like,
No, 100%. And I always make the point that with the players, those women definitely cleared such a path. And I think it was, frankly, harder work within the media than sometimes with the players, is that, there was still so much more left to do.
Do you remember any specific cruelties that struck you because they were so overt? Somebody just telling you to your face?
Yeah, sure. A general manager of a team that will remain nameless. I was put on the beat. I was very young. I was the first woman to cover that beat. And I did the whole, handshake, hey, I'm going to be covering your team this year, whatever. Let's schedule an appointment to talk. Let's do whatever. And he just told me, he's like, yeah, we I don't think he said, we don't want you here, but he certainly said a version of that. And he's like, I'm not going to help you. He's like, because if you don't get stories, you won't be here very long. So I'm not going to talk to you about stuff. Like, my door is closed. Basically, not open.
Hello, nice to meet you. My door is totally closed to you all the time.
And clearly transmitted that to some of his players who were uncomfortable. Again, they just had never had a woman regularly in their locker room. I'm sure there have been women who crossed in there, but they hadn't regularly had one. And I had several key players on the team who gave me one-word answers. And it was, very clearly the idea was they're going to make sure I wasn't good at my job, and that that would get me out of there, which is what they wanted, because they couldn't explicitly get me out of there. The era had passed where they would be able to say, like they did with Christine Brennan or Lisa Olson or any of those women who I wouldn't be here without. I want to make that super clear. That was the real fight. We don't want women in the locker room. We're going to fight it, that kind of thing. That era had passed, and now it was, we have to have you here, but we're going to make sure you don't stay. And, like everything else, you keep coming to work, and eventually people, that became, it's funny, it turned into a really good situation for me. But not before the GM was fired and replaced. So
what did the dream...
I lasted longer than he did.
What did the dream look like for you then? Like, what were you dreaming of? Certainly it didn't look like this, right?
No.
You have overachieved beyond your wildest dreams, correct?
Different. I would say overachieved. It's differently achieved because I want to be a newspaper writer. So I grew up in Washington, D.C., in that area, and I read Tony Kornheiser and Mike Wilbon and Christine Brennan and Thomas Boswell and all those guys in the newspaper, and they were gods to me. I mean, the talent level of the Washington Post sports section when I was a kid and when I first joined it, because I got very lucky and got to start working there in my early 20s, was just, it's off the charts. You look back at those names. And I read All the President's Men 600 times in high school, and just thought the Washington Post was the be-all, end-all. I went to print journalism school. I did not go to TV school at all, never picked up a camera. I think now you're kind of required to learn a little bit of everything. That was not the case. Like, they had a broadcast degree and they had a print degree, and I got a print degree, and never in any way, shape, or form wanted to be on television, had any thought of being on television, just wanted to be a writer, wanted to do what those guys did. That was another place I interned in college, and they were so warm and adopting me, and Tony and Mike are like my uncles in the business. And Christine had a huge effect on me because she was the first woman to cover a pro NFL beat. So she was the first woman to regularly be on the beat for an NFL team, which was kind of the last bastion of, that. And I read her in the newspaper every day when I was still in high school and didn't know. I didn't know she was the first woman on an NFL beat. I didn't know she was the only woman on an NFL beat. I just knew that I loved that football team. And the person who I would read about them from pre-internet was I would open up the Washington Post in the morning, and it was Christine Brennan. So by the time I learned that there weren't almost any women in that position, or that she was the first, or any of that, like, it was already done for me. Nobody could have told me, like, oh, women can't do this, because my starting point was that a woman had done this. So those kinds of formative experiences, Tony, Mike, and Christine and all of that, made me, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to work for that paper. And if I had done that for the rest of my life, I would have been happy. And frankly, I worked there for almost 10 years. And the only reason I left was because newspapers went through a huge industry change. And I like to say, because newspapers existed back then. Obviously, a lot of stuff's been revived, the Washington Post in particular, which is awesome. But at the time, it was a real bottom dropping out of what you could do. And, I started at the Washington Post, and for years I covered tennis, and I went to all 4 Grand Slams for the whole 2 weeks. I mean, budgets like that don't exist in newspapers anymore.
Our stories are similar. I think they're parallel. This isn't something that I imagined myself doing. It was just, I was doing the same thing, reading newspaper columnists, and it's all I ever wanted to be. Was your family supportive of this from the beginning?
Yeah, absolutely. But it was really my thing. They were just like, okay. I mean, when I was 13, I knew I wanted to be a sports newspaper reporter. And there were, even in college, you have to do a required internship at Northwestern, and they have a list of newspapers you can do it at, and Fort Lauderdale Sun-Sentinel was one of them. And I went into that in the selection process and just said, I want to work in sports, so I want to do a sports internship. It's no good for me to do news. It's not going to get me anywhere. I'm not going to make any connections with anyone I'm going to want a job from. And I had to petition the dean of the school because they'd never done anything like that before. And so it was just sort of a lot of steps like that along the way.
They didn't think sports was a serious journalism thing.
I was told it was the toy department. And I actually went back and gave the graduation speech at Northwestern about 5 years ago, which was really cool for me to be able to do. And I brought that up, that it was, people tell you one thing and you can go do another. But I do want to say, when I first got to the Miami, Fort Lauderdale area, you were the only one within, you're about 5 years older than me. You were the only one within a 15-year age of me. And you were so cool, Dan. Like, you were like this young, you were just made columnist, I think. Like, you were like everywhere. You had this amazing confidence, at least on the outside. And you
everyone thinks I have it all together. I don't know what it is that I'm projecting.
I don't think that now.
Yeah, you know better now.
But I was 21, and you were the cool 26-year-old, and you had friends. You were kind of. I said to your producer Matthew, I don't even know how much you remember this, but to me it was very formative because nobody was that nice to me. I was living in a new city. I didn't know anyone, and you're like, oh yeah, come out for beers with me and my friends. Like, come, whatever. And I was like, oh my God, this is, I get to go out with Dan Batard and his guys and do whatever and hang out. And it was very much like, okay, someone I can at least relate to. And I wouldn't say we were particularly close, but it was one of those things where it's just like what you meant in terms of, okay, like there's someone else there that is also probably being told he's too young and not quite accepted in the old guard and that kind of thing. So it meant a lot to me. And it's funny, Matthew said to me, he's like, oh, and what advice did Dan have for you about journalism or making it? I was like, nothing. We never talked about that. He just was someone to go have a beer with. And that was actually really important.
Well, I didn't know anything then. It was too young for me to even be a columnist. I didn't know what my voice was going to be or what it should be. I look back at some of the stuff that I wrote back then. It was not. I've got diametrically opposed viewpoints to what do you know when you're in your early 20s about writing larger opinion pieces. But because some of this, I'd like some of this to be biographical, like your early years were like what? How do you arrive at being someone who's interested in this stuff?
I love the football team. And, I was just entranced. We can go through the 3 names they've had since I was a kid, the Commanders now. But they won 3 Super Bowls from the time I was I want to say 8 years old to when I was in college. It was just a really fun team. The city was so into them. And that got me in. That was the gateway, and that got me into other sports. But
was there any
just loved
connection
it.
with family members?
No.
Because for me, it was the way to connect with my father. My father sort of introduced me to sports, and I would say that my father and I were closer than my brother was with my father, just because I took an interest in this as a connection point with my dad.
Did you know it at the time? Did you do it on purpose?
No, I did not know that I was being impacted this way. I was just searching for ways to connect with my father, and this was an easy place that didn't require a lot of conversation.
But what did you love about it? What was the thing that got you? Was it just, I like watching games? Was it something more broad?
Well, I mean, at the beginning, it's just that I'm showing up at the Orange Bowl, and my life as an exile is very small. And I'm walking into an amusement park that might as well been for me. I had no access. We didn't have money, so even Disney World wasn't available to me. Yep. So you're going from small exile life to this sprawling place that's noisy, and you're holding your father's hand as he takes you through the jostle, and you just get sort of changed there, especially because it was a good place for me to have a deeper bond with my father. My father would then go, originally my father would show up to my baseball games and get very mad because I was striking out and stuff. He'd show up after work with his tie and stuff, and my mom would explain to him, look, I can teach him a lot of things, but being a man is something you have to teach him.
It's your department, buddy.
Yeah. And so he would then become the coach of my teams and stuff. And so that was just a place, because my father, very old school Cuban, sort of emotionally limited. And so it was just a place where I could feel connected to him in a way that I would assume any child needs.
You know what's so awesome? You're talking about your dad, and we all know him. That's what's so great, is that I'm picturing this because, I've personally met your father, but your whole audience knows him. And that's very cool.
Yeah.
Just an aside.
That's the greatest. Yeah. I've said this before. It's just the greatest professional blessing of my life to be able to grow old with him on television, and to share him with an audience.
All right, we are in one of the best times of the year in the sports calendar, and March Madness is taking over everything. When you get to that bar with your friends, and you look across the table, and you see a 15 seed beating a 2 seed, you see an 8-9 matchup that's really tough, all of a sudden the waiter comes by and you say, hey, let me get a tall pitcher of some ice cold Miller Lite. Miller Lite keeps it simple with undebatable quality, great taste, and only 96 calories. It's the beer that strips away everything you don't need and holds on to what matters most, the original light beer since 1975. Times change, but you can always enjoy the great taste of Miller Lite. Tastes like Miller time. Boy, does it. To get Miller Lite delivered right to your door, visit MillerLite.com/beach. That's BEACH. Or you can find it pretty much anywhere that sells beer. Celebrate responsibly. Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. 96 calories per 12 ounces.